Nice that you're here. In this episode of our Stradivari Codes, we deal with a topic that every string player is eventually concerned with, the sound quality of string instruments. What exactly makes the fine tone of a violin, viola, or cello good? And how do we recognize this good sound in the first place? When we talk about sound quality, we mean the individual acoustic characteristics of an instrument. That is, what our ear perceives, sometimes quite directly, sometimes more unconsciously. Whether a tone is perceived as warm or bright, soft, brilliant, or perhaps somewhat nasal is part of it. Equally important is how clearly different tones stand out from each other, how precisely an instrument responds to quick pitch changes, and whether it remains effortlessly audible even in a large room with a lot of audience. It is also crucial how dynamically the instrument plays, whether it reproduces gentle pianissimo passages as convincingly as powerful forte sections. And last but not least, articulation plays a significant role. That is, how quickly and sensitively an instrument responds to the bow, how directly it reacts to the player's impulses. These characteristics do not arise randomly but depend on a variety of factors, some of which are obvious, while others only become apparent upon closer inspection. A central aspect is the wood. Traditionally, the ceiling is made of spruce, while maple is usually used for the floor and ribs. But the decisive factor is not only the type of wood, but also its origin, growth, age, and especially storage. Resonance wood from alpine high-altitude regions, air-dried over years, generally develops a higher tonal maturity than industrially dried material. And contrary to what has long been assumed, for example, Stradivari did not necessarily store his woods for decades before processing them. Dendrochronological studies have shown that the woods used were often only a few years older than the instrument's year of construction. The logs were usually stored outdoors, protected from rain but exposed to sunlight, often directly near the workshop. Luthiers accumulated large amounts of wood over the course of their lives, partly to prepare for themselves and partly for future generations. When a luthier passed away and had no heirs, their stock was often purchased by colleagues, so the material was passed from workbench to workbench through time. In addition to the material, craftsmanship plays a crucial role. An experienced luthier knows exactly how much they can work the top, where the bass bar must be placed, and how much tension it can withstand. The varnish also influences the sound, not only visually but acoustically, and even the smallest details like the curvature of the body or the distance between the F-holes have a noticeable impact on the sound character. The quality of an instrument often grows with the luthier's experience. The more instruments a person has built in their lifetime, the more nuanced their understanding becomes of how form and function meet in the sound. But even the best material and the most precise craftsmanship do not realize their potential if the so-called setup is not correct. This includes careful positioning of the bridge and sound post, selecting the appropriate strings, and tuning with the bow. The musician's playing technique naturally also has a strong impact on the sound result, but ultimately it can only bring out what is inherently present in the instrument. An instrument lacking in resonance will hardly reach the back rows of a concert hall even under the hands of a soloist. Conversely, a superb instrument that is poorly adjusted will not demonstrate what it is capable of. This is where the collaboration between luthier and musician comes into play, a joint effort that requires a lot of sensitivity and mutual understanding. The question now is whether sound quality can also be measured objectively. To some extent, this is possible. Acoustic analysis methods allow insights into frequency spectra, vibration behavior, or volume contours. But what ultimately touches us remains subjective. While one musician prefers a warm, round sound, another seeks brightness and projection. Sound ideals differ not only individually, but also culturally. French musicians, for example, tend to have a different understanding of sound than their Italian or German colleagues. This is due to the acoustic environments in which they grow up: language, music, everyday noises. Someone socialized with German folk music hears differently than someone raised with Indian music, where quarter-tone intervals are commonplace. This has nothing to do with better or worse. It's simply different. From my own experience, I can say French instruments usually sold best in France, German ones in Germany. Italian ones, on the other hand, were in demand almost everywhere in the world, a fascinating phenomenon that continues to this day. When the term sound quality is mentioned, many immediately think of names like Stradivari, Guarneri del Gesù, Amati, or Guadagnini. These legendary instruments are indeed acoustically exceptional, but not only because of their age. Rather, it is the interplay of masterful craftsmanship, carefully selected materials, harmonious varnish, and perfect balance that makes them so special. Nevertheless, modern instruments today are by no means at a disadvantage. On the contrary, they play a crucial role, also because the old Italians are no longer available in sufficient numbers to meet the needs of professional musicians worldwide. Even the requirements for sound and volume have changed. While a concert hall in Stradivari's time was significantly smaller, today's instruments often have to perform in large halls or alongside modern pianos. Contemporary compositions demand different qualities of sound, articulation, and projection, and modern violin makers are addressing these needs. Therefore, it makes little sense to directly compare old and new instruments. No one would think of comparing a 1920 Bugatti with a current Ferrari on the racetrack, or measuring a Rembrandt painting against a work by Robert Riemann. Both have their value, but in very different contexts. Still, some modern violin makers try to position their works in comparison to the great masters to gain recognition, but this comparison is flawed. A Stradivarius may be ideal for Baroque music. An avant-garde piece by Wolfgang Riem might be harder to adapt to it. Additionally, almost all Stradivaris have been modernized by now, meaning they no longer sound as they did at the time of their creation. We will discuss these differences in more detail in another episode. Finally, the question remains: how do I find a good instrument? A high-quality string instrument is characterized by balance across all four strings and in all positions. It responds delicately to musical expression, can produce different tonal colors, and has a recognizable character, both in sound and shape. An ideal instrument is one that offers more possibilities than the musician currently knows how to use. This way, it remains a companion over the years that grows with the player. Teachers can be helpful in the selection process. They usually quickly recognize whether an instrument suits a student's playing style and personality. However, the decision about the character of the instrument, what is perceived as one's own voice, ultimately lies entirely with the musician. Personal taste develops over time, changes through new musical experiences and stylistic developments. And perhaps it is this constant search for the right sound that makes making music so lively and exciting. That's it for today. Thank you for tuning into the Stradivari Code. Subscribe to us, share this podcast with other musicians, and continue to join us on this acoustic journey. Stay interested. We'll hear from each other.